More and more of the world's most sophisticated aircraft, tanks and weapons were arriving in the Gulf. And 6 American aircraft carriers with over 400 planes would be positioned within striking distance of Iraq and Kuwait.
One week before the UN deadline expired, 750,000 coalition troops waited on the battlefield, as the politicians made one last attempt to find a diplomatic solution. The US Secretary of State, James Baker, met Iraq's Foreign Minister, Tariq Aziz, in Geneva. Both men knew that tens or even hundreds of thousands of lives were at stake. And James Baker warned the Iraqis not to use chemical weapons, reminding them that America had nuclear bombs. But 7 hours of talks ended in failure.
If Iraq should choose to continue its brutal occupation of Kuwait, Iraq will be choosing a military confrontation which it cannot win and which will have devastating consequences.
But Saddam remained as defiant as ever and promised his people a great victory. He warned that the Americans depended too much on technology. He boasted that Iraq could rely on the bravery and experience of its soldiers. Their faith would defeat the enemy. At midnight on January the 15th, 1991, the UN deadline expired. Across the world, people watched and waited. Everybody knew it was just a matter of time before the war began.
In the early hours of January the 17th, 1991, hundreds of coalition aircraft took to the skies and headed for their targets. Operation Desert Storm had begun. British RAF pilots in low-flying Tornado aircraft carried bombs designed to crater Iraqi runways. The Americans' first target was Iraq's capital. From the rooftops of Baghdad, 3,000 anti-aircraft guns fired into the night. Flying straight into this wall of fire were 8 American bombers. They were so sophisticated that the Saudis had nicknamed them Ghosts. The F-117 stealth bomber was designed to be invisible to radar. But this was its first test in major combat. The stealth's first target was the main communications tower in Baghdad. At exactly 3 a.m., the pilot in the lead aircraft pushed the button and a 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb descended on its target. Across the city, the ground shook as 14 more bombs from other stealths hit their targets. The aircraft turned for home. Cruise missiles launched from US warships knocked out the power stations and plunged the city into darkness.
The air campaign, unleashed by the coalition against Saddam's Iraq, was codenamed Instant Thunder. It was the most powerful and focused use of air power in the 20th century. On the first night, coalition aircraft flew over 1,000 sorties. They hit power stations, radar and communication networks, airfields, and chemical weapons facilities. The aim was first to gain control of the skies above Kuwait and Iraq and destroy Saddam's ability to coordinate his forces, and then to target the forces themselves.
Guided in by laser, a bomb launch from planes like these could explode within 3 meters of its target, even from a range of 7 miles. The bombing campaign had badly damaged Iraqi radar stations and gave Iraqi pilots little chance to respond. Rather than fly blind against the most sophisticated air force the world had ever seen, most of them opted to leave their aircraft inside hardened hangars and try and sit it out. Throughout that night and into the following day, American and coalition aircraft continued to attack Iraqi targets, including Saddam Hussein's palaces.
Saddam Hussein was in fear for his life. He moved between safe houses to avoid the coalition attacks. But in public, he would not be cowed. On Baghdad radio, he declared that the mother of all battles had begun. And in secret, he ordered his army to launch the weapon that he hoped would blow the coalition apart. Its target was a country over 700 miles from Kuwait.
At 2 a.m. on January the 18th, 1991, air raid sirens sounded across Israel. They warned of a Scud missile attack from Iraq heading for Tel Aviv, Israel's biggest city. Moments later, the first Scud hit this factory near a housing estate in a residential suburb of the city. Initial reports from the Israeli army suggested that Israel was under chemical attack. In the confusion and panic, people all over the city put on their gas masks. Some even injected themselves with the antidote to nerve gas.
Saddam Hussein's attack on Israel was an act of ruthless calculation. He hoped Israel would retaliate. If it did, Israel would then appear to be on the same side as the Arab nations in the coalition. Saddam's hope was that the Arabs' hatred of Israel would make this unthinkable for them. They would withdraw from the coalition, and the coalition would collapse. From Washington, senior White House officials called the Israeli defense minister, urging him to show restraint. For hours, the whole world held its breath, waiting to see how the Israelis would respond.
8 Scuds had been fired at Israel that night, and by daybreak, residents were still on alert. But reports of a chemical attack had turned out to be a false alarm, and remarkably, nobody had been killed by any of the missiles.
Under huge pressure from the White House, the Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Shamir, agreed not to retaliate, at least for the time being. In return, the Americans promised to make the destruction of the Scud missile launchers inside Iraq their top military priority. The Scud hunt was on. Coalition aircraft began flying around the clock, searching thousands of square miles of empty desert, hoping to spot Iraq's estimated 20 mobile Scud launchers and then destroy them. For the American commander, General Schwarzkopf, it was a tough challenge.
Finding the mobile launchers is like finding a needle in a haystack, as you can well imagine.
Scuds continued to hit Israel, and Washington ordered Schwarzkopf to step up the search. By the 24th of January, 40% of the coalition's air sorties were diverted to Scud hunting, and special forces like Britain's SAS were sent into Iraq to try and destroy the launchers from the ground. The Scud attacks on Israel went on, but still they failed to break up the coalition as Saddam hoped.